Welcome back to the second video in the series where we overanalyze the info from Togashi covering the categorizations and proficiency levels of a number of characters. In this video we'll be tackling the info provided to us about Transmuters. All 6 of them. Since this is the second video in the series, to get better context, my advice is to watch the enhancement video first and then come back to this one. For those that have already seen that video, I'll be adding a new concept going forward, which I didn't mention then, that of being category midpoint. This will serve to distinguish characters who are category lean, such as Nobunaga, who is a transmutation lean enhancer, from those who are exactly in between categories, hence the term midpoint. Please keep in mind that these characters are still members of their base categories. For Nobunaga, that would be enhancement. However, they have borderline equal potential to pick up skills and improve in one adjacent category. The main difference, from what I understand, is that if they continue to train only in their base category, they would over time shift to being a pure member of that category, while they could never do the same with regard to their adjacent one. In other words, if Nobunaga were a transmutation midpoint enhancer, he could shift to being a pure enhancer if he were to solely focus on enhancement, but could never shift to being a pure transmuter no matter how much he tried, and would at some point be getting diminishing returns. There were no midpoint enhancers, so that's why I never bothered with it then. On the other hand, all 6 transmuters for which info was provided are either pure or midpoint. Let's begin with everyone's favorite killer clown of a dubious sexual persuasion, Hisoka. Yes. Bad intro. So, last video I said that I'll always start these with a character whose category membership and proficiency level fall entirely within my expectations, to be sure we have a solid reference point. However, we only have 3 characters with assigned proficiency levels, and I was kind of surprised by all of them to some extent, so we're somewhat arbitrarily starting with Hisoka. The Murder Magician is rated at natural, and is therefore on the same proficiency level as Uvogin. Now, comparing them in the first place may seem contradictory to what I had said previously. To reiterate, these proficiency levels aren't absolute, but relate exclusively to the user and cannot be used as a reliable power scaling tool in a lot of cases. However, I think this is one of the few where they can actually serve as a decent power scaling metric. The 2 reasons are: A, I see them as similar enough in talent to the point that the threshold required for either of them to reach any of these levels would be similar enough, and B, battle was essential to them in their own unique ways, and to say that they both had an inclination for it and actively sought it out would be an understatement. As such, comparing Hisoka and Uvogin specifically makes a decent degree of sense. With that said, what I find surprising is that this info is supposed to relate to characters as they are currently in the story, or when we last saw them, alive. And there's been a lot of speculation going around about Hisoka's potential power-up due to the influence of post-mortem Nen. The fact that Hisoka is currently at natural can mean one of the following 3 things. 1. The boost from post-mortem Nen is either no longer active or wasn't really functioning as a power boost in the first place. All it did is bring Hisoka back to life by resuscitating his heart and lungs, as per his instruction and desire. 2. He is under a post-mortem power-up, and that was what was needed to get him up to natural in the first place. 3. He is under a power-up, but that wasn't enough to boost him to extreme. I personally favor option 1, since I think both returning back to life and having a permanent power boost is a bit too much in terms of both world building and narrative. For those same reasons, I very much doubt option 3 is true. Postmortem Nen has shown itself as potent enough that I think anyone would be bumped up a proficiency level if it were to function like a power-up, and there's somewhat conflicting evidence at that point. Finally, I really don't think option 2 is true, since I can't imagine Hisoka as being any less proficient than Uvogin, considering the factors I previously mentioned. As far as categorization is concerned, the horrendous Harlequin is a pure transmuter. I was actually a bit surprised that he wasn't at least somewhat enhancement lean, considering he favors close quarters combat and isn't afraid to get down and dirty, as long as he showers later, in an outright brawl. But since Texture Surprise utilizes conjuration and he now has to actively use it to, keep up appearances, it could be that a pull from enhancement on one side and conjuration on the opposite means that he lands exactly on transmutation. Speaking of enhancement lean transmuters, Killua is an enhancement lean transmuter. So lean that he's actually midpoint. Nothing much to add here, considering his focus on physical prowess and his almost entirely close quarters fighting style, it makes total sense. Furthermore, I'm sure that Godspeed is quite the strain on the body, and enhancement is a good way to both boost its efficiency and power, and also counter any potential adverse effects of moving quite a bit faster than your body is able to normally for Killua. Let's keep this train going. The final enhancement midpoint transmuter is Machi. A pleasant surprise that's not actually too surprising when you think about it. Her physical abilities are above average for troop standards, as Killua found out when she held him in place with her abdominal muscles. This kid has been showcased as one of the more, to put it mildly, physically capable characters in the series. At that point in the story, he could push open at least 16 tons. And she held him in place using her six-pack. I sure hope that didn't awaken something in him. He was at that age. This video is a shit show. Additionally, her ability itself kind of requires high physical prowess to be effectively utilized in the first place, especially against superhumanly strong Nen users. Hanzo is a conjuration midpoint transmuter. This is slightly surprising, since he was already said to be an emitter in some supplementary databook which I can't find now, and I've always found his disposition to be a good match for the category as described by Hisoka, since he seemed to be rather impulsive and easy to rile up, matching Leorio's energy quite well in that sense. As was mentioned in the series proper, however, Hisoka's personality and the Nen-type correlation method is a mostly arbitrary and unreliable heuristic, and should never be taken as definitive when determining a character's category membership. Now, as it can be seen by non-Nen users, Hanzo's skill 4 obviously utilizes conjuration as a baseline. Creating a double seems to be an ability type characteristic to conjuration, in tandem with manipulation. Additionally, as the double can phase through walls, this means emission has to be a part of the Hatsu as well. When we first saw the ability, I actually thought it was pure emission. Since then, I still believed him to be an emitter, and due to the double's ghost-like ability to levitate and phase through walls. But I entirely overlooked the fact that non-Nen users could see and talk to it, something characteristic only to conjured objects and entities. I was going to argue that since he's still a transmuter, utilizing manipulation to such a great extent, even though it's the category opposite of his own, and for which he then therefore has only around a 40% aptitude for, along with emission, for which he'd have around 60, probably less actually since he's a conjuration midpoint, this Hatsu would cause a memory overload, considering this is only one of at least 4 separate Hatsu, even for an established genius like Hanzo. This concept was first introduced by Hisoka with regards to Castro and his mistake of focusing too much on Nen categories he wasn't proficient in. I genuinely can't believe I'm referencing Castro this much, and I think I probably will have to in the future. But then again, unlike Castro, who used the double to fight in tandem with him, Hanzo's main body remains in a sleep-like state while the double is active and his consciousness is transferred to it, which along with a few other conditions could alleviate some potential balancing issues. Though I do have to say it's not that huge of a trade-off considering all the utility an ability like this brings to the table. Unless people are aware of it, you essentially have the perfect alibi. In any case, as mentioned, since this is only skill 4, that means there's at least 3 more Hatsu based in, or at least heavily reliant on, transmutation and or conjuration. And I have to say that Hanzo is one of the characters I'm really looking forward to seeing more of. Moving on, Yuppie is a pure transmuter. As I said in a previous video, going over the info we got on enhancement, Chimera ants really aren't particularly good exemplars of their categories, since they seem to possess innate abilities not directly tied to, but potentially greatly amplified through Nen. You'll be hearing that sentence in pretty much every video in the series going forward. You see, it intuitively makes sense that if any category were to provide you with the ability to alter your body, it would have to be transmutation. Biscuit, who we'll discuss next, is a good yet arguable example of this. Killua also has the ability to change his hands into claws, but since he could do so before being awakened to Nen, I have to assume that this has to be some pre-Nen Zoldyck shenanigans. Now, Yuppie's baseline power seems to be the ability to morph his body in various ways. However, as I previously mentioned, giving one's body morphological properties it doesn't already possess seems to fall within conjuration, not transmutation. But then again, what is Yuppie's body? He's essentially a magical beast chimera. and all the forms he could turn into could be those for which he already possesses a genetic potential for, which would then again fall within transmutation, if you accept my previous assumptions, that is. Be that as it may, his second ability, unofficially named Rage Blast, allows him to convert his rage and frustration into an explosion, a Hatsu very similar to Phaeton's Rising Sun, whose transmutation status is still in an official limbo, mind you. This was all just to make the point that, yes, pure transmutation in my mind suits Yuppie quite well. Not quite done with him just yet though. His proficiency level is rated at natural as well. While I wouldn't have been surprised for all the royal guards to be rated at extreme, it also makes sense that they'd be one step below Meruem. Spoilers for the following video, I guess. I am quite sure they all would have reached that level given enough time and opportunity, however. Last, and this time around definitely not least, Bisky. As I had hinted in the enhancement video while discussing Netero, Bisky is the only Transmuter to be designated as extreme, the highest possible proficiency rank. I was initially a bit surprised when I saw this, but it really does make total sense. She's brought her body to its absolute peak and at 60 years old is one of the most experienced Nen users in the story. Another interesting thing is that she's a pure Transmuter. Considering her insane physical prowess, her rather head-on approach to fighting, and the fact that Cookie-chan as a Hatsu seems to have a supporting role in aiding recovery and training, at least from what we've seen thus far, I had expected Bisky to be at least somewhat enhancement lean. After thinking on it, however, Cookie-chan is almost certainly conjuration based. Emission isn't out of the question, but I'd argue conjuration makes much more sense in this case. This means that while her fighting style and focus on physical prowess would pull Bisky towards enhancement, her Hatsu would pull her towards conjuration. Furthermore, if her transformation is indeed a direct product of transmutation, as I previously stated, and the fact that she almost always takes and maintains that form, this would mean that transmutation is always within her purview. As such, on a close review, her being a pure transmuter should hardly be surprising. And we're 2 for 6. It's officially a series now. I would like to say I'm gonna hurry it up, but between work, finishing up my masters, and a few other things, I can't in good conscience do that. This video features only 6 characters, and I genuinely thought it wouldn't even make it to 10 minutes. I was wrong. I have a problem stopping when I begin to write these scripts, since there's always just a little bit more to add, mention, or qualify. I still ended up cutting at least 10 to 15% from this one. Though I do think that was for the best. I ramble and get stuck on tangential topics way too much. In any case, thank you very much for watching, feedback is always appreciated, and I'll see you in the next one.